It's kind of strange to be here welcoming you all to this very interesting discussion that you're all going to have, Priyam is going to have with Ida here. Because you must be wondering, what am I doing here? Because I'm not the author, neither am I the co-author, and I belong to a rival media publication, so to speak. But that's the beauty of books and storytelling, that it brings everyone together on the same page. So I'll just very quickly. So I'm Chandrama, and very quickly, just to introduce myself and my engagement and my involvement with this wonderful book that you are about to read, is that I think 2018, around that time, I was working on a Netflix project, and it involved doing a lot of research about the origins of the Calcutta School of Yoga, because there was one particular personality whom we were researching about. And in the course of the research, and the film eventually got made and I was part of it, but in the course of the research, I had to go back I had to make quite a few trips to the archives at AVP. Those who are familiar with how AVP functions would know that the grand old wizard of the archive, the library there, Shokti Babu, he's basically, he's got a photographic memory, right? And you just have to go and, just write down, scribble on a piece of paper that, this is a name. Just give him a name and he'll dig up anything and everything that has ever been published about that personality. So I spent a lot of time in the archives, and because, and in the course of this research that I was doing on a completely different character, there's one name that kept coming up, and that was of Reba Rakshit. In Bengali, Reba Rakshit. Now, this is a name that a lot of us would have heard from our parents who were growing up in Calcutta around that time, especially in North Calcutta, where you had the akharas and the various sort of homegrown gymnasiums where bodybuilding was very much a part of the culture, a way of life. And it was very interesting because the journalist in me was intrigued, because there seemed to be all kinds of things that were being said about her, written about her, and one had heard about her, but nothing that she had said, anything that, about herself, nobody knew if it was true or anything. And then Shoktida gave me one little piece of paper, which was basically an obituary, just one little obituary, and that was the only sort of official document of this person having ever lived and died, and nobody knew who printed the obituary, because it wasn't signed off. He didn't quote any family member, it wasn't signed off by anyone, and he said that nobody knew where it had appeared from, but it had been printed. So in the course of the research that I was doing, I got to meet very many different kinds of people who were involved with yoga, who were involved with the Calcutta schools of yoga, with Ghosh yoga, with various disciplines of yoga that Kolkata was known for. And I was thinking to myself that, it would be interesting to find out a little bit more about this woman who was supposed to be a stunt master at a time when Bengali women were not really at the forefront of, in the spotlight for something like this. We all know Fearless Nadia. We all know of what was happening in Bombay, in the film industry. But you had someone like this performing these death-defying stunts, and that to a Bengali woman. And I was intrigued and I wanted to explore more. And then one fine day, somebody introduced us, and she said, you know what? I was just thinking it would be nice if we could find out a little bit more about Reba. And I was like, whoa, okay. So since then, and that's how we kind of connected, and we started on this crazy, wild adventure, first across the city and then across the country, because parts of it happened in Kerala, because she was part of a circus, parts of it in Kolkata. And the more we kind of, sort of just try to find out about her, the more we realize that this is not just a story about one woman who was challenging patriarchy, but it was about a society that was going through a lot of chop and change at that time. And the worst part was that she never got a chance to tell her own story. And that is what resonated with the two of us. And every time we stumbled upon, and there were a lot of things, a lot of red herrings, right? A lot of people were giving you painting very different pictures because nobody had any solid proof or evidence. It was a wild goose trail. And then we tried to talk to as many different people who could remember something about her. And what kept on, and the point that we connected was that this story had to be told. This is a remarkable story of a remarkable woman who had a remarkable life, but everything we know about her has been told by the men in her life. And each person in her life was there for a reason. It was very transactional. She never got to tell her own story, and that's where Ida comes in. And eventually I had to let go of the project. We traveled a bit of a distance together and we were on this adventure together. But for various reasons, I couldn't continue along with her. But I'm so glad, so happy and so proud that Ida is telling the story of Reba Rakshit for the first time the way it should be told. Because so far, whatever we've had in the media, whatever we have had on online in the digital space, or whatever little things that you may have read or heard about her, is not even a fraction of the story that has been told in this book. So on that note, I think I've taken up a lot of time, but I can go on and on and on because both of us are very emotional right now because it's taken a long time for this to happen. And I must thank Shumikta. Where is he?
He's outside.
He's outside. Well, for taking this up, because I know I just took this book and took Ida and just told him that this needs to see the light of day, and he kind of handheld us from that point onwards. So I'm very happy, very honored, and I think Priyam will take over from now. And thank you all for being a part of this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chandrima, for setting the context for this book. Now, as you know, Ida's book is called Strong Woman. To add some contrast, the organizers wanted the frailest man in sight as the moderator. so here I am. But seriously, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Very honestly, from personal experience, I have never known a woman who isn't strong in one way or another. So the words strong woman for me are a bit of a tautology. Having said that, there's a particular kind of strength that Ida's book focuses on. The strength of Reba Rakshit, the strength of making the impossible not just possible, but routine. Reba was a woman who had a motorcycle go over her, who would shoot fatally sharp knives at herself and survive that, who would have an adult elephant go over her thrice every evening, month on month, year on year. It's ironic that Reba's name literally translates into luck, but there was nothing lucky about what she did. Having said that, it is my great luck to have Ida here with us, who has given Reba a second life, who's brought Reba's story to the world. So Ida, my first question, perhaps an obvious question, is, as somebody who's a writer, musician, an artist, and a yoga expert in the US, how did you get drawn to the story of Reba in 20th century Kolkata?
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It's really, really special and an honor for me to be here. And thank you, Chandrima, for the introduction. This really is, as she said, a project that we began together, and really in the spirit of I think women kind of bonding together and talking about stories that are important to talk about. So that is kind of the obvious question, is how did I end up here, talking about this story? And I've been coming to Calcutta for almost 10 years now. And what first drew me here was the history of yoga in North Calcutta. So as a sort of American yoga practitioner, yoga in the US is a very different thing. It's changed. Yoga has changed for centuries, really, in what it means. Nowadays, it's kind of a fitness sort of thing, and that is how I came to it. But what I realized after years of practice was I wanted to be a little bit more aware of its history. And the type of yoga that I was first introduced to came from North Calcutta. And this was in contrast to what had become more popular that had come from Mysore. People knew names of Krishnamacharya or Pattabhi Jois, these kinds of names. But what was interesting to me is that there was this whole other history of yoga from North Calcutta. So I first came on a different research project to look at a manuscript that a friend of mine had found from the early 20th century of a yoga exponent from Calcutta. He was half Bengali, half English. And he was very prominent in his time, but he had never published this beautiful manuscript. So a team of us, about 3 of us, started looking into this manuscript and trying to publish it. And the owner of the manuscript said, you need to try to find the author's family and get their permission at a minimum. And if you can kind of get their blessing or their permission, you can go ahead and publish this manuscript. So 3 of us from the US landed in the middle of the night in North Calcutta, thinking, okay, well, I guess we'll try to find this person's family. And as Chandrima alluded to, there was a lot of walking down alleyways and knocking on doors and basically that kind of research, very little to go on. But over time, connections were drawn and we were able to meet kind of yoga exponents from North Calcutta, get more connections, get welcomed into that world a little bit. And then through that, again, as Chandrima mentioned, there was this name that kept coming up. And I was particularly drawn to Reba's story because there's this obvious sort of impasse, which is now, at least in the West, or at least in the US, yoga is this sort of feminine thing. Women are, it's seen as, this sort of housewives kind of thing going to yoga. But if you look at the history of yoga, women were not included in the practice until the 20th century. And so I became really fascinated on who were the links between that. What women, specifically from India, what women were sort of the bridge between the male, sort of Brahmin male history of yoga and the, open to all, very feminine yoga that we have, at least in the West today. And so Reba's story stuck out to me as this female figure with an incredible life story that I really wanted to learn as much as I could about and explore this as much as possible.
Tell us a little bit about the title, because the words strong woman are not exactly very familiar words in the context of being a stuntmaster, being a circus person. We're all familiar with the word strong man, and not just in a circus sense, although maybe you could argue that it is also relevant in a circus sense, given what happens these days with the word strong man. But given what strong man means and what it has been intended to mean, how conscious was that decision to choose strong woman as the title, and what does that stand for you?
I think at the simplest level, she did these incredible feats of strength. This is what she was most well known for. So if you'd say her name and ask anyone of a generation that remembered the circus, they would very often remember Reba, and they would immediately remember the elephant stunt. Everyone would, oh yeah, the elephant stunt. Either they'd seen it or they had heard about it. It was kind of legend, even if they hadn't seen it themselves. So really, in essence, she was known for feats of physical strength, which was, again, especially if you see the cover, quite shocking, given, that she was not a huge, muscular person. She looked like someone who wouldn't be able to do that, very slender. And so I think in the simplest context, that's where the essence comes from, that, okay, when we say strong man, we have these ideas, but if we say strong woman, yeah, what does that mean? So I wanted to draw out the fact that she was, really did the feats of strength, first and foremost, but then also, faced so many difficulties, so many tensions, so many conflicts, because this was the 1940s and 1950s. She's in sort of a leotard costume, yet she's the star of the circus. So these tensions, how is one a figure in context, in social context, in cultural context on one hand, and also this successful performer on the other? And I think there's the strength that had to lie behind that to walk in both worlds and still be a person, but also this sort of strong figure known for feats of strength is hopefully what the title is kind of drawing out.
Absolutely. And Reba, as I'm sure Ida will shed light on gradually, was a superstar back in her day. She was somebody who opened for Bishnu Charan Sr., as most of us here obviously know the legend. She, in fact, performed in front of the who's who of Bollywood in what was then Bombay. In fact, Raj Kapoor was so impressed, he felt Reba should join the cinema. Mm-hmm. How big was Reba back in her day? And then why did suddenly history forgot about her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've touched on it perfectly. I first started feeling like her story was as big as it is when I was doing research, when we were starting this. And again, if you ask somebody, it's not a name they would say to you, but if you ask them about her, they'd immediately remember. And when you start to see, okay, the name is in people's memories, it's very much alive in their memory, but it's not alive in recorded history. But then exactly as you dig, celebrities, royalty, she was wooed by all of these figures, and they wanted her to be in cinema. She was making, at that time, a lot of money. And there's all these stories where she would try to quit. She would try to say, this is enough, I can't take this. Physically, mentally, I've had enough, I want a normal life. But as soon as she would do that, the circus company would call and say, you can't quit, because no one will come to the circus if you're not in this. And so she was really the star act for many years, and in many different circus companies, Gemini Circus, Bombay Circus, International Circus, and she really couldn't get away from it because she was the one that people were going to see. So yeah, absolutely huge figure in her time. And that was what was so stunning starting this project, is exactly that question: why is there nothing written about her now? And I think that, I think a lot of these types of histories about female characters or people that were seen as, performers or something, there's not necessarily a history recorded. They were very much appreciated for their entertainment value, but not necessarily appreciated as a figure that should be recorded in history. And that's, I think not right at all, because she's very much still alive in memories and moved so many people, so should be recorded in history.
Absolutely. And I think as part of your research for the book, you spoke to a lot of people in Kolkata. Some of them had seen Reba perform, right? They had that memory. So tell us some of the more interesting anecdotes. How do people who've seen her perform remember her?
Yeah, it's so nice to watch people's faces light up that, they remembered immediately the elephant stunt in particular. What was, I think, was lucky and now a bit sad about working on it is a lot of the research was done right before the pandemic, and the people that most remembered her were of a older generation. And so I'm really glad that as much research was done before the pandemic as possible, because a lot of these stories now have been lost. But one particular anecdote I think that was really special was actually Chandrima's aunt that remembered this and said that, I might ruin it a little bit in the book, but that's okay, that afterward the sort of legend of her stunt was so inspiring to people, including little girls, that then they would start to pile pillows up on them, as many as they could, like higher and higher and higher, so that the pillows acted like an elephant, and try to see if they could, withstand the weight of the elephant. And so little anecdotes like that, you realize, okay, this really got into people's hearts in a really special way.
You know, the fascinating thing about Reba's story is that it is already so audacious and even at certain levels ludicrous that when somebody is recalling it, they lend to add more fabrications. In fact, you'll find in the book that in many of the advertisements that would go before Reba's performances, she was called Miss India, even though she never competed for or actually won that title. So I'm sure there must have been a lot of other rumors and theories and projections that were made about Reba. So if you can just tell us about a few of those.
Absolutely. And yeah, and you've hit on the tension, which is she was doing the impossible. I mean, if you say withstand the weight of a full-grown elephant 3 times a day, we would say you're crazy. That didn't happen. But that did happen. So then exactly, how do you decipher between what's crazy and possible and what is impossible? I think that the Miss India is a perfect example where, you know, the accolades were kind of piled on one after the other. They started referring to her as Miss India in 1955, which is quite funny because in 1955, I know from scouring archives, that was the only year there was no Miss India contest held. Okay, so that was very helpful for them, for Bishnu Ghosh and for the publicizers of the circus to say that she's Miss India because there was no Miss India that year. So things like that, you know, opportunistic, to sing her praises, to build up her resume. But yeah, there was, on the other hand, not much that you needed to really build up because some of the most impressive things were true.
You mentioned one name there, Bishnu Charan Ghosh, who essentially is the catalyst behind Reba's heroism. And Bishnu Charan Ghosh was her tutor, was her mentor, was her guide. And there's this fascinating part in the book where Reba comes to take what is essentially a yoga exam. And Bishnu Charan Ghosh is putting her through the drill. She's doing all these breathwork techniques. And then Bishnu Charan Ghosh says, hang on, lie down. I'm going to put a plank on top of you. And then I'm going to have a motorcycle go over you. And Reba obviously resists. She's like, what is this? But somewhere down the line, she knows that this guy has that faith in her. So she follows through and she learns the motorcycle stunt. That is the amount of trust that she had in Bishnu Charan Ghosh. So tell us about the equation, about what stood out to you, what made them such a great pairing.
I think there's a few interesting elements. I mean, first is very much this culture or idea of guru, that you have to have complete faith in the guru, otherwise none of the practices will work. So I think in the context of Ghosh's yoga college, the context of the history of yoga, there was this strong belief that the guru wouldn't lead you astray. And if you put full faith, undying faith in the guru, the practices would bear fruit. So I think that's first part of it. Now, what's interesting to that is when those teachings sort of originated in yoga texts, did they mean taking a motorcycle over you? You know, that's where the bridge between yoga and performance, or yoga and physical culture, that mixture that happened, especially in the 20th century, that makes it a little bit more complicated, because I'm not so sure that was what they meant by faith in the guru, withstanding, you know, elephants and motorcycles. I also think Bishnu Ghosh, you know, he's a really interesting historical figure as well. From North Calcutta, his brother being Paramahansa Yogananda, you know, these kind of iconic figures in the yoga and spirituality. And through researching for this book and other projects, you know, Ghosh had this reputation of being able to find talent, to spot talent, to develop talent, and to really take someone from, in some cases, from the street to the star of the stage. And I think, to his credit, he was very successful in determination and to take a student who had talent and to develop that. And sometimes that meant that he took people in that maybe you wouldn't expect him to, you know, but he could see something, some character or some talent, and he would take that in. And then because of this history or this context of faith and trust in the guru, you know, these relationships were built.
You know, earlier today, Ida and I were talking, and she told me the story of how she saw a video clip when Bishnu Charan Ghosh's own daughter decided to do a stunt that Reba would do and had mastered. So tell us about that, because it's a remarkable anecdote.
Absolutely. So maybe before I get to that, I'll just say that what was difficult about this project is that there was very little recorded. And there were hardly any photographs. There's a funny anecdote as well, as we were in contact with the legendary circus kind of founder, M.V. Shankaran, who also recently passed, but was incredibly, at 98 years old. And you were trying to get some, asking him, he had hired Reba for the circus, for the Gemini circus, and we were asking, do you have any photos, anything? And he just laughed, like, no one was taking photos. Here, I think he said, nothing happens and everyone clicks a photo of it. Yeah. And that day, an elephant walks across her chest and no one takes a photo. So there was very little of Reba, aside from a few photographs and a few newspaper archives. But there was the same stunt done by Ghosh's daughter in 1970 in Japan. So I had been able to find a film clip of that. And I thought this was great, because then you can at least see the stunt. It's not Reba, but it's another woman doing this stunt. And so the elephant kind of circles, it comes in to the ring, it circles. This one was done for Japanese television. The elephant kind of circles, and then in this case it was Karuna Ghosh, daughter of Bishnu Ghosh. She lies down on the ground, and then a wooden plank is placed on top of her. Now, this plank alone is extraordinarily heavy. This plank, just the wood could crush someone. So first the plank is placed on top of her while the elephant is still circling, and the elephant handler kind of leading the elephant around. And then once the plank is set, the elephant is supposed to walk across the plank. Now, what you see in this clip is that the elephant they start to lead it to her, and the elephant doesn't want to go because it knows that there's somebody lying there. And so it takes a few tries for the elephant to, okay, I'm gonna, walk across this person. And I actually had a professional elephant handler watch this clip because I wanted to know, are they faking it? Is the elephant stepping in a way that the weight is never on the person? Is there some trick going on, trick of the eye? And as she was watching it, she said, no, there's no trick. The entire weight of the elephant walks across this person. Yeah. So once the elephant finally crosses over her body, the stunt is technically done, but then this is television, so they want some, her to jump up, her to say something, her to, and what you see is that she stands up and she's like completely dazed, can't really speak, is kind of looking downward, and you get a sense of really the trauma of what this act was actually like for the person doing it. And also in that clip, that's his daughter, that's Ghosh's daughter lying under an elephant. So you get a sense of like, wow, the lengths that they went to for the performance to be successful, incredibly dangerous, incredibly, looking to the spectacle of it and trying to bring that up as much as possible. But that, once I saw that, the tone of the scenes describing the stunts changed. Chandrima and I kind of watched it together and thought, wow, I mean, this is not, a walk in the park. This is really, really, in many ways, traumatic to go through 3 times a day.
She didn't do it to Ed.
No, after that, yeah.
And she was built differently than Reba.
Yeah.
Very
That's
true.
another important point.
That's a very good point, yeah. Karuna Ghosh was a much bigger, sturdier, much kind of tougher figure than Reba.
Speaking of the performance and the spectacle, one section of your book reminded me of this film Blonde. I don't know if many of you have seen it. It was 2022 release, biopic on the life of Marilyn Monroe, played by Ana de Armas. And there's a moment in Blonde, a very powerful moment in Blonde, where Marilyn realizes that she does not belong to herself anymore. It is the audience that has made her a star, who now has a sense of ownership over her time and her talent. There's a corresponding section in this book where Reba has a similar feeling. How does she deal with that?
Have a say in this. You know, on one hand, I am making this money, I am garnering this fame and admiration, you know, I have these proposals from people to be parts of films, for marriage, for all these kind of glamorous things, but I'm not in control of that. That's, you know, this is all kind of happening around her. And I do think that that was a tension for her that was difficult to manage. And I was able to meet a nephew of Reba's, and he kind of, you know, gave an insight into the family's feeling about her, and then that kind of allowed us to see it from a different angle, which was, yes, of course she's famous, but also if we're her family, do we really want her out there doing those things, wearing these costumes, doing these difficult stunts? They're worried for her safety. They're a little bit, at times, not happy with how she's appears to the outside world. And so I think she was really also caught between that. Am I a person at home? And when I am a person at home, my family isn't really all that thrilled about what's happening, except if they want the money, you know, and they want to be close to that. So that tension, you know, not only not feeling like you're in control of your life in a professional sense, but also having the dynamics in a personal sense. I think this was inevitably actually quite sad. And the longer that I worked on this project, and Chandrima and I spoke about this a lot, the elements of the loneliness and the sadness that you see in stories of Marilyn Monroe or other famous figures, that really came to the surface. That, okay, actually, this becomes at times a really lonely life, except that on the outside it looks like all glamour.
Yeah, there was a time when for months and years all she would do was she would wake up, she would go to the station, she would take a train, perform, get into a car, come back to the station, come back home. So absolutely no time to self-reflect, to connect or to socialize. The next thing I want to get at is, talk us through what would go inside Reba's mind just before she was about to go on stage and face the elephant. One of the fascinating things about Ida's book is how she describes the actual stunts. I don't want her to talk about that because that will spoil it. So you pick up a copy and you find out. But what was going through that psychologically? There was a battle to be fought psychologically before there was a physical, so to speak, a stunt to commit, right? So tell us about how her mental preparation was before she would step out there and do what she did.
I think this is the interesting combination of yoga and performance, and yoga and physical culture, that a lot of the training was controlling the breath, controlling the mind, and that actually these stunts were done by holding the breath. Because if you didn't have air in the lungs, the weight of the elephant or the motorcycle would crush the rib cage. But the lungs acted kind of like a tire, that they provided that resistance so that you could withstand the weight of the elephant or the motorcycle, whatever it was. So in essence, the first kind of training was, can you control your breath under extreme circumstances? You know, that takes a lot of training and a lot of control to be able to do that. When an elephant is going to walk over you, does your mind go crazy? Or can you stay calm and relaxed and control your breath? So that was her training. And that's where the idea of her being into yoga and also circus performer overlaps, that you needed to be able to do that in order to withstand the stunt. But again, from seeing this clip of Karuna Ghosh doing the stunt, you see that, okay, there's also something else going on. That before this is going to happen, you're not going to be in the same mindset that you were in, you know, before the stunt was going to take place. There's a sense of kind of going dark or shutting down in order to be able to withstand it. And that's, again, what I saw in the clip. And also she writes, there's a little bit of an essay that is, she writes or is attributed to her, where you get this feeling of, I'm just going blank, I'm going dark. I'm just going to kind of shut down until the stunt is over. I think it's kind of a trauma response in some way that you have to withstand.
And even then, when she would come out onto the stage, and I'm not going to give much away here, I promise, she would essentially enter a state of numbness, right, where she would almost become immune to her own surroundings. And there's a very interesting incident as to how, even though she got into that state of numbness, she was so minutely aware of her stage and surroundings that she managed to notice a major error in one stunt and it had to be taken away. So that's something to look out for when you read the book. But moving on to the next question, and I know you touched upon the gender aspect a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper into that. It's one thing carrying the weight of an elephant. It's completely another thing bearing the burden of patriarchy, something that many women had to do then, many women have to do now. How much of what Reba did, what she achieved, was shaped by her gender? How much more or less do you think her career could have panned out differently had her gender been different? How much of the fact that she was a woman enabled or influenced what she did?
I think that a huge draw was that she was the uniqueness was that she was a woman. Because other men had done the elephant stunt, and yes, it was impressive, but there was something very different about a woman doing this, and also just stepping into the ring and being center stage. That was very shocking, and that brought out that tension. Is like, do I, there's something about the circus that's always a bit abject. Like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Does this make me uncomfortable? But it's also entertaining. I don't really know as a viewer. I don't really know how to feel about it. And I think her femininity was that, that she was on one hand doing this very masculine stunt, on the other hand, this kind of slender feminine figure, very beautiful, would dress in the leotards or things like that. So that tension, I think, absolutely contributed to her success. I think that to the question of did it play out differently for her if she was a man, I think that really shows in her later years, which I don't get into in the book because I felt that was, in the end, I felt that was her private life. And while researching the later years of her life gave context for me for the earlier years, it also felt like this is somebody's private life. This wasn't this part of her life that she put on stage, so it's best to leave it out. But what I found is that she was very alone later in her life. She took a job as a receptionist just to kind of make things work. She lived alone. She didn't have a lot of community. And I think that plays to it, which is like, well, probably by that age, if a prominent male figure, there'd probably be a book written about him already. He'd be celebrated, there would be statues, yet now she's done all of this and she's alone, and there were multiple stories and interviews of people saying that the older parts of her life were very sad and she didn't have much support. So I think in that way, it plays into it greatly.
How much of an outlier was Reba in her era? In the research that you did you find any other women who would be circus performers? Not necessarily women who would, take an elephant on their chest, but who would be involved in circus activities, who would be involved in these kind of incredible dramatics and theatrics? Or was Reba a complete outlier in her era?
I think she was very unique, but maybe you want to speak to the culture of the Bengali cinema and kind of that as well.
No, yeah. Basically, when we were researching that aspect of performative performances, right, there were a few references around that time. So I think there was a woman who would walk into a tiger enclosure and put her head into the lion's mouth or something like that. There were all kinds of things happening with the circus around this time, right? Yeah. And there were stunt women in Bombay and in down south, but there was no Bengali woman who was doing what she was doing. So she was an outlier in that sense because what they were doing was, yes, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of training to be able to deal with circus animals. But what Reba was doing was completely different because no one before her had done it. I mean, there's no one else after her as well. Bishnu Ghosh's daughter tried it once for the cameras. That time, Reba had stopped doing that stunt. She did it once and she never did it again. That should tell you how much it would have impacted, right? Yeah.
My final question before I open it up to the audience, and it's a hypothetical question. Imagine, Ida, that Reba were alive today and she were in the pink of her health, in the prime of her career, what do you think she would have done in 2024? Would she have continued as a stuntmaster in the circus? Would she have become an Instagram influencer? Would she have had a cinema career? If she were at Glenburn, I know what she would do. She would try to swim off that roof and live to tell the tale. But otherwise, in the context of today's times, what do you think Reba Rakshit would have done? What do you think would have done justice to her time?
Of course, it's impossible to say, but I think her spirit from the start, the book begins with her as a little girl. Her spirit from the start was definitely one of a bit of a wild child, pioneer, trying difficult things, going out on her own, not doing things that other people did. You know, being absolutely fine to say, that's fine that you like this, but I want to go, you know, climb this tree by myself and as a little girl, so I'm going to go and do it. So I think that spirit in whatever she did would be very much present. I don't think she was one to follow in line. I think she was one to really blaze her own trail. So I don't know what that would mean today, but I'm sure it would be something that we probably wouldn't even imagine. It's a shame that we don't know the answer to that, because it would be very, very fascinating.
Do you watch Bollywood films?
Okay, I try. I'm starting to.
No, the reason I asked you this is because this is such a cinematic book. It deserves to be made into a film. And I was going to ask her, who do you think should be a good fit as the
Oh
protagonist?
gosh, I think Chandrima would have to answer that. That maybe you can answer that as well.
I think I'll leave that to the audience to speculate once you've read the book.
Okay, good.
But I think my final takeaway from this conversation is that a strong woman's potential begins where a society's imagination ends. Strong women like Reba, as we've seen, they do not only defy biology or physics, but they defy history. And I really hope that Ida's book inspires more writers to discover more Rebas, women whose stories must transcend their time and their place, because their strength, their talent, most definitely is transcendental. So on that note, I open the floor for questions. Please, if you can raise your hand and then ask Ida whatever you want to ask. Thank you so much, Ida, for that.
Thank you.
Got a question there?
I do have a question, but I don't want to be the man and go
That's
first.
fine.
If there's anyone else who wants to go first.
Please.
Yeah. Please go.
No, you must. I don't know what I
Thanks, Ida, and thanks for moderating as well. It sounds fascinating before reading it. I just want to ask, I think something you touched upon on the gender sort of point. I was just wondering what challenges you faced, or how were people's attitudes when you were researching or even telling the story, in terms of did someone want to kind of still buried, or it's just a kind of someone we used and kind of threw away, and if you're kind of almost digging this up, did you get any of that, or were they very open? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are aspects of her life that I'm quite sure were there that are not in the book for that reason. I mean, there was she was at times used in many different ways, I'll say. So that aspect of it, I think, is absolutely there, that people wouldn't want to be out there. But in the end, I think that it wasn't really necessary for the story for it to pull out like every sort of personal element. And so there was enough there without saying that. But certainly, I think her later years, again, here's the star who's working as a receptionist, who's kind of alone, that has a different, I'm not sure she would want that side of it told. I don't know. So definitely there were elements. I think also there was a tension at points about me working on the book, not necessarily obviously being from Calcutta. And that was interesting to navigate as well. So I think there was that aspect of it. And then there were the things in the research that were maybe too personal or too just not necessary for the story, that in the end didn't make it in the book. Yeah.
I just wanted
Please.
to touch upon something here. That
Hats off to her tenacity and her patience. So there were these people that we got in touch with, and there was this person who worked in Doordarshan archives, because we figured that there may be this one interview that she'd given on Doordarshan, and she wanted to dig out that file. So this person took her sort of a merry ride and kept on telling her, okay, I'm going to take it out for you, and kept on, sort of buying time till there came a point when he said that, okay, can you get me a gig somewhere? For her to navigate all of this, it takes a lot of grit, a lot of determination, because everybody wanted their pound of flesh at the end of it. That's why I said what I said in the beginning, that her story was, everybody wanted to have a say in her story, but she didn't have a voice. And I think Ida has given her a voice in this book.
Ida, did you, in the course of your research, speak to any medical practitioners about the everything that she went through, what that entailed, what that may have done to her body? Do you have any insights on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good question as well. So I was in Japan a few years ago, because that is where Karuna Ghosh, daughter of Bishnu Ghosh, who also did the elephant stunt, lived. So she had moved from Calcutta to Japan, to Tokyo, and lived there until she passed away, I believe, in 2008 or around there. And so she had done the stunt, not to the extent that Reba did, but she had also done some of the motorcycle stunts, which is the same stunt, but a motorcycle goes across the chest. Now, I shouldn't say the same, actually, because the way that the ramp and the motorcycle work is that the impact is great, but you're not actually withstanding the weight of the motorcycle. It's kind of going over you. So it's different in that sense than the elephant that is pressing its full 2,000, no, whatever it is, many thousands of pounds down on the person. So in Japan, when I was there speaking with her family, her son, he said that she had gone to the doctor later in her life for whatever, and they had done a scan and some medical issue. And when the scan came back, the doctor said, "What have you done? What have you been doing? I've never seen something that looks like this." And she explained that she was a performer and that she had done these feats of strength, but the doctor said he'd never seen anything that looked anything like that, the damage and the wear and tear. So I think the physical repercussions of these stunts were very severe.
Thanks, it sounds fascinating, and I really look forward to reading your book. The circus seems to be a big part of her life. That's what made her who she was. Did you find any evidence of the circus making her more motivated, her relationship with the audience, for instance? What role did that play in making her who she was and the fantastic stunt person that she was, the role of the audience?
Sure. I mean, I think that the crowds were, over time, there for her. And one thing that I was able to find through lots and lots of digging and many hours in the archives were the circus advertisements. And you can see her name first and foremost, sometimes even her picture. So it says, Bombay Circus, they're there in the book, Bombay Circus, but then the only name that's listed, star performer, is Reba. So absolutely, I mean, the audience started to really associate the circus with her, which is why she couldn't really get away from it, because they were like, well, if we don't print her name, no one's going to come. So you can really see the use of her photo, the use of her name as the draw. And I think that the performance aspects of that then were developed, and Bishnu Ghosh became really a salesman in some way, promoting her, talking to the audience, getting the audience going. That's where these accolades come from, Miss Bengal, Miss India,
Padma Shri,
yeah, exactly. All of these sort of accolades just to pump up the audience and then kind of build her up. But that was one thing that I was able to find quite a lot of, was advertisement after advertisement. Bombay, Gemini, International, that it's her name that's printed. The only name that's printed is hers.
I have one last question. It's a bit of an observation and also a question. So this is going back to the gender aspect of it somewhat. Studies point to the fact that on any sort of visual media or whatever, whether it's theatre, cinema, whatever, there is a tendency for people to enjoy watching women suffer. So, do you think, this is taking a little bit from the audience question that was just asked, do you think that may have played some part in Reba being so popular also, as in terms of a visual spectacle?
I think so.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that, when we started this project together, it was one of glory and glamour and like, wow, this figure who has done these incredible things, who everyone knew about, who these royalty and everyone loved and wanted to be around. And then the more that I worked on it, all the way to the end of writing it, I thought this is actually quite a sad story, because behind it is this sort of, this crowd, this audience that wants to watch this.
Yeah.
And she's wearing things that are very striking for that time, still even today they might be very striking. She's doing this very difficult stunt. And there's, Priyam alluded to it a little bit, there's one anecdote that we won't spoil, but where people are very unhappy with it, to the extent that they didn't really want her to continue. So I think you're absolutely right, and that's a big point of it. I wanted the book to be a celebration of her more than a sort of sad story. So those elements are there, I think, but they're undertones. So that hopefully it can celebrate her success as well. But you're absolutely right.
We talk about that Sharbat place that we discovered.
Go ahead.
Yeah. You may want to talk about the Sharbat place we discovered, her name on the plaque. That is,
Yeah.
So,
Paramount?
yes, so that's an interesting find. That at Paramount, as you may be familiar, they have these the plaques, right? Where you have names of all the dignitaries who've been their patrons, and most of them are men. The few women who are there listed are actually authors or freedom fighters. There's only one woman who doesn't fit the bill, whose name is out there, and that is Reba Rakshit.
Oh, her name is, that's
Yes. Next time you go there, you'll find her name. It's at the end, on the right-hand side, okay? It comes with Bishnu Charan Ghosh, and then Reba Rakshit. So chances are, she was the only woman in that all boys, muscular, beefy men who'd gone out for their sharbats, and they put her name out there. I think that was, and again, we were thrilled to find that, and there's just one little thing, one recorded evidence that she was somebody. That kind of opened up so many doors. So I remember we doing a high five on that.
Anything that we found was like, wow.
Any other questions? Please do take your copies of Strong Woman Reba Rakshit on your way out.